Morning, dear friends. It's Monday, the 4th of Kislev. Today is November 8th. Monday, we're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, we are studying Maseches Shabbos, Perek Ch9, chapter 9. We are doing Pei Zayin Amud Beis. No, Pei Zayin Amud Aleph, 87a. Turning to Pei Zayin Amud Beis, 87b. Yesterday, we ended off in middle of a discussion about three decisions that Moshe Rabbeinu made unilaterally, and Hashem endorsed and ultimately supported Moshe's unilateral decision. This was introduced, of course, by way of our conversation about the Prisha, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu separates from his wife, which is part of the story of Matan Torah, because in Matan Torah, all the Jews had to be Pirish. And this, of course, it goes into the broader context of our Mishnah that there is the potential for ritual impurity, either 2 or 3 days, and essentially the people were going to the mikvah after they were no longer susceptible to the ritual impurity of Zera, as we discussed. So I'm going to share the screen. We're going to continue where we left off yesterday, and I have 2 items, and we're going to go back at the end of today's shir Bli Neder, the last 10 minutes, to the Gemara that I skipped. There's 2 small paragraphs that I skipped yesterday, and when I read that Gemara, we will also have a correction to an assertion that I made earlier on in our discussion of this Mishnah. So let's share the screen. We'll go to the new stuff first, and then we'll go back to the old Gemara, which I believe gives some information to an earlier conversation, and I believe it corrects what I originally said. So yesterday, as I find the place, we went a little bit more over the timeline of Matan Torah, or really the timeline from the arrival to Har Sinai to Matan Torah. And what we uncovered is that there is actually a machlokes about the intricacy, the specific details of this timeline. Everybody agrees that the Jewish people arrived to Mount Sinai on Rosh Chodesh. Everybody agrees Matan Torah was on Shabbos, but what date was Rosh Chodesh? I'm sorry, what day of the week? And thus was Rosh Chodesh. And therefore, what day of the month was Shabbos is a machlokes of Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim. And really that machlokes plays into and influences the shaila, the question of if that zera, which is discharged, can yet be potent to confer ritual impurity. We're now again in the midst of 3 items that Moshe Rabbeinu made unilaterally. Moshe's 3 unilateral decisions were as follows. Number 1, Moshe Rabbeinu separated from his wife after the revelation at Sinai. Number 2, he added, I misspoke before. The primary unilateral decision, no one corrected me, was that he added a day, according to Rabbi Yossi, he added a day to the wait from the arrival to Har Sinai to giving the Torah. Initially, the understanding is that Hashem asked for 2 days of separation between the spouses, Hayom u'Machar, and Moshe added unilaterally a 3rd day, based on his reading of the instruction from Hashem. Number 2, Moshe separated from his wife, and number 3, he smashed the luchos. Yesterday, at the close of our discussion, we discussed why Moshe decided to add a day. It was his read in the pasuk, Hayom u'Machar. He thought that there should be 2 proper 24-hour periods, and Wednesday, the day he received the instruction, was not a full 24-hour period. Moshe separated from his wife because he made a kal v'chomer. The Jewish people were given advance warning that they're going to communicate with Hashem, whatever that means, by Matan Torah. And before doing so, they needed to be temporarily celibate. If the Jews needed to be temporarily celibate for a one-time revelation from Hashem, Moshe Rabbeinu, who gets no warning and is constantly in communication with Hashem, must be celibate. Of course, it would be a good time to point out one of the distinctions between Judaism and certain Christian denominations about if the priests should be celibate for some in Catholicism based on their understanding of marital relations, it's considered not an ideal, and therefore priests are today need to be celibate. Those who study the history of the Catholic Church, I'm not a scholar of the Catholic Church, but if I'm not mistaken, it was not always the case that priests were celibate. It was something that may have been introduced for varying political purposes. I guess there's less corruption if there's no progeny to pass on church wealth or whatever. There are probably other theories as well. Again, not really the scope of our conversation. Judaism, however, makes no demand of a spiritual leader or a rabbi to be celibate. And on the contrary, that's very much not a Jewish value, with the one exception, that would be Moshe Rabbeinu. Hold on. I don't see anyone's faces. Is that to do with my connection or? Oh, okay. Reb Beryl, it brings to mind the famous joke that I'm sure, Reb Beryl, you're probably thinking of. The rabbi and the priest are flying together, and the priest is enjoying a good shtickle chazer. And so he asked the rabbi, "No, why don't you try it? It's good. No one knows. Have a little chazer." And the rabbi says, "I'll eat it at your wedding." So,
anyway. Rabbi, we go even further. We don't look upon a rabbi being single as being the ideal situation.
Exactly my point.
We had that in Montreal. No, a rabbi of a congregation.
That's exactly the point. It's not a value in Judaism to be single, and on the contrary, the Kohen Gadol, for example, had, in order to represent the Jewish people on Yom Kippur, had to be married. Right? In Gemara Yuma, we'll learn that Kohen Gadol had to be married. So there's, in Judaism, marriage is wholeness. Marriage makes a person a better Jew. Again, it's not, I want to be very careful. It's not always possible. Hashem has a custom plan for every person. Not everybody has the opportunity to get married. A person that tries to get married or wants to get married and can't, this is certainly not condemned or looked down upon in Judaism. But as far as a rabbi, a person in a spiritual role, there is no demand or value of celibacy. And that's the point that I wish to make. And so that is an important point to add. As a matter of fact, in the Gemara, there's a famous brothers, Ben Azai and Ben Zoma, who are known to have been, I'm getting a private message. Would you like to elaborate, or should I read your comment out loud?
If you want to.
Okay, so Sharon, explain to me what's not true. Please.
It's not true that they don't look down upon you or whatever if you're not married or like live this kind of lifestyle that they understand.
You're saying people do look down?
Yes, they do. They don't think it's acceptable. They don't think no, they do, definitely.
Well, I can only speak for myself and my education, my understanding. And my education, I should be clear. I'm not saying that there aren't people who unfortunately do project all different kinds of inappropriate judgment and stigma. In my opinion, a Jew does their best. A Jew endeavors. But unfortunately or fortunately, Hashem has a customized plan for everyone. And so some people have a longer time to find their bashert. And the fact that a person has a longer journey to find their bashert or struggles to find their bashert is absolutely not a condemnation or the detriment of that individual. The point simply is that there's no virtue, particularly for a person to be spiritual, to be not married. And on the contrary, marriage is seen as a something that could help a person in their spirituality. And so that's my point. But certainly not.
Rabbi, there are several married people who are jealous of the singles, and I'll leave it at that.
This is also true.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Present company accepted.
By the way, Reb Beryl, my wife is sitting next to me. So
Present company
decision. Each of them to be and I answer given this place and you find them or take comparing Jewish people's chutzpah to make the explanation. I'll show you just so my pair has 6 of the mitzvahs, not just from the carbon. Moshe did wholesale. Need something else. I'm cracking up.
Professor has a
All right, say something now, please.
Okay, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, so I'm having something's up with my sound. All right, Professor. Now that we've had this interruption anyways, would you mind sharing your thoughts?
I wanted to say that you're taking your analogy with Korea, with carrying a message, the addressee has disappeared, and hence there was no need for the luchot for them.
I'm sorry, what disappeared?
The addressee of the message.
You're saying if you're delivering a parcel and the whole recipient doesn't exist anymore, or whatever that means, so then there's nowhere to deliver to. So you're saying, in a sense, what happened here is that Moshe is tasked with delivering the luchais to the Jewish people who've accepted the Torah, or something to that effect. And by virtue of their behavior, they've made a statement that this doesn't belong to them. And so the whole addressee disappeared. So now, and that's essentially a good way of explaining what's happening here in the Gemara. Thank you. I thought you were going to make another comment, which maybe you will soon. Let me just try one more thing. Professor, say, I want to see, again, I'm trying to get the sound. Rebel, say something, anything.
Yeah, for sure. You're coming in clear.
Oh, no, I know I'm coming in clear. I'm trying to figure out my sound. That's the problem. All right, I'm going to keep on going. We'll do our best. So, as the professor explained beautifully, the addressee has disappeared. The Torah is the people who the Torah was meant for don't exist. But now, how do we know that Hashem actually agrees? So here we go to the very end of the Torah. The very final verse in the Torah says, actually, hold on. First, let's go to not the end of the Torah. Let's go to a famous reading that's in Parshas Kisisa. We read this on fast days. And initially, Moshe Rabbeinu destroys the tablets. He then makes a series of visits to Hashem, if Kaviyachol, a series of visits to God on Mount Sinai, where he first lobbies Hashem to not destroy the Jewish people. Then he lobbies Hashem to forgive the Jewish people. And then ultimately, Moshe engages in recreating the luchais. Where was the instruction to create new luchais? It's 34:1, Exodus 34:1. Hashem says to Moshe, remake two luchais like the original ones. Write on those tablets. The matters, the items, the things that were on the first tablets. Asher shibarta, that you broke. So Asher shibarta, which literally translates which you shattered. But there is another deeper interpretation. Amarish Lakish, Asher means like Yasher koichacha sheshibarta. Anyone know the Jewish word shkoyach? So the Jewish word shkoyach is a Yiddishized word of two Hebrew words, yishar koichacha, which means literally good. Well, not literally. It means good job, well done, good on you. And so Hashem is telling Moshe, good call. And Rashi is going to explain how Asher sounds like Yasher koichacha. Ishur. This was a validation. She'ishru v'shibchu al shvirasam, that Hashem validated and praised Moshe for breaking the luchais. And so based on this word, Asher Shibarta, and based on Reish Lakish's interpretation that Hashem said Shkoyach, Hashem said, well done. From here we can infer, here we know that Hashem ultimately signs off on this decision.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi, am I correct in remembering that the broken luchos had a lot of kedusha still, and they were kept in the Beis Hamikdash?
Correct. Ultimately, the second tablets were preserved along with the first tablets, the Shivrei luchos, were ultimately preserved alongside the regular luchos, and they were present in the Aron, in the ark. And so they indeed retained Kedusha, or maybe the word is not, in addition to Kedusha, they retained a great value to the Jewish people, most likely because the two tablets also conveyed a powerful message of Teshuvah. Imagine the Jewish people could be brought to a low, to the point where the tablets are destroyed, and they can yet come back from that and come back to the point where they are worthy of the Luchais again. It's the wrong citation. Hold on. All right, so now what I want to show you very, very briefly is that if we'll go to the end of the Torah, so if we'll go to Deuteronomy 34, the last chapter, and you go to the last pasuk, this we read not long ago on Simchas Torah. The verse reads as follows: L'chol hayad hachazaka, for all the great might, l'chol hamoira, and awesome powers, hagadol, asher asa Moshe, that Moses did, le'enei kol Yisrael. So we're talking about the uniqueness of Moshe. There was never a prophet. There was no one who did so many miracles. And all the wonderful things that Moshe does, le'enei kol Yisrael, before the Jewish people. So there's a Rashi on this pasuk, which is not surprising. And he explains that all of these references, might and power, are reference to specific achievements in Moshe's career. So what is the Yad HaChazaka, Moshe's might? This is a reference Shekibel es halucha haTorah beluchais biyadai, that Moshe received for the Jewish people the tablets and the Torah. The word Yad HaChazaka is associated with the Torah to the point that a very famous literary work in the Jewish people was called the Yad HaChazaka. You know which work that is? Rambam, Maimonides' work on halacha, which we sometimes call Mishnah Torah, was called the Yad HaChazaka. And now you understand why he called the Yad HaChazaka, because the Rambam asserts that you could study the Chumash, and then you'll only need to study his work. And so Yad HaChazaka is a reference to the Torah. Also, the word Yad is the numeric value of 14, which are the 14 volumes of the Rambam's work. Next item in this final verse, we're talking about all the miracles and all of the disciplinary actions that Moshe was engaged in while the Jewish people were in the desert. Lastly, what was before the eyes of Israel? And here Rashi says something that would be shocking had we not seen our Gemara. This is a reference to Moshe's I can't pull up the right word. His initiative and his bravery and moral clarity to destroy the Luchais before the eyes of the Jewish people. Shenemar ve'ashabreim le'inechem, as the pasuk, as Moshe recounts to the Jewish people, I smashed the tablets in English we say in your face, in their presence. They saw it. And here for our Gemara's purposes, v'yiskima dasa kadosh baruch hu l'daitay. And Hashem endorsed, Hashem signs off on this behavior. Hashem agrees with him. Shenemar, and this is quoting our Gemara, Asher Shibarta, Yishar Koichecha Shibarta. So, as we know, Hashem endorses this because Hashem said, thank you for destroying the Luchais. So, we learned in the Gemara, Moshe broke the Luchais and Hashem signed off. And we find, ironically, that this is alluded to in the very, very last pasuk in the Torah. So this was not just an event of an event in Moshe's life, but at least according to Rashi's interpretation, this was the most pivotal moment in Moshe's life. Anyone care to take a stab at how this could be considered the high of Moshe's career? One would think this would either be the low of Moshe's career, surely a moment of great disappointment. So how would you explain that the last word of the Torah is a reference to Moshe's destroying the tablets?
Maybe what would have happened had he not destroyed the Luchos?
Oh, so what would have happened?
God would have killed them all.
So it could have plausibly been a great jeopardy for the Jewish people.
Or there never might be a Jewish people altogether.
There may have never been a Jewish people. Rashi describes elsewhere that Matan Torah is a marriage of the Jewish people. The Luchais, in a sense, were like a some wedding paperwork, a ketubah where the husband and wife commit to one another in marriage and to be faithful. And Moshe is described as the go-between, the shadchan, or there was another legal technical title in ancient times. Moshe was the representative of the bride. And so Rashi explains that the luchais would have been exhibit A against the Jewish people in a court case about their unfaithfulness to Hashem, because the Jewish people made a molten image. So imagine, again, not literally a court case, but if this was to go to trial, exhibit A is going to be where the basic and first instruction in this relationship is don't make idols. And so Rashi explains in other words that Moshe destroyed the evidence. He tore up the document that would reflect poorly on his client, on the Jewish people. Now, maybe you'll call that tampering evidence, but from the Torah's perspective and from Hashem's perspective, this was the moment that really showed Moshe's leadership. His devotion was such that although the highlight of his life is to bring the Jewish people and to receive the Torah and to interact with Hashem, he showed that he valued the Jewish people's well-being even more than his personal relationship with Hashem and his personal value of the Torah. And so it's at this moment that he shows his great value to the Jewish people. I got to add one more thing before we hear other comments. The Gemara says, Bereshis, Hashem creates the world Bereshis, and it says Hashem created the world for two things that are called Reshis. What are the two things called Reshis? The Torah and the Jewish people. The Gemara says, I don't know which one takes priority. And then the Gemara answers that the whole Torah is addressing the Jewish people. So if the Torah is coming to talk to the Jewish people, well, who comes first? The subject who's being addressed. And so the document, Kaviyachol, the document that's addressing the Jewish people comes after there are a Jewish people. So this is conceptually, the Jewish people are necessary for the Torah to have any significance. And this was demonstrated by Moshe, by his willingness to abandon, so to speak, the Torah, to destroy the tablets, to present and save the Jewish people. So now let's go back to the Torah. So you have the whole Torah. And the last line of the Torah gives us a clue to the value and the hierarchy between the Torah and Bnei Yisrael. That the Torah is coming for the Jewish people and not vice versa. And so Moshe is being celebrated because this was the act of great sacrifice where Moshe was allowing himself to disappear, if you will. He was allowing all his dreams to dissipate, all for the sake of the Jewish people. And it's a reminder, not that you should sin to protect another Jew, but how we have to have our priorities straight. And Moshe, as a leader and as the model of Jewish leadership, has to put their own spiritual achievement and own personal experiences behind their flock and the people they represent. And so that is the Rebbe's explanation in different words about how this could be considered the apex, the height of Moshe's career, even though essentially he's destroying God's tablets that were from God to the Jewish people. But yet Hashem endorses it, and not just endorses it, but celebrates this in the final words of the Torah. That's my rant. Now we'll welcome any additional comments. Alan?
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I read somewhere where as he was coming down the mountain, he noticed that some of the letters were being withdrawn, were flying away, and that's when he threw the Torah down.
So indeed, there are a number of different perspectives or presentations of in the different Medrashim and Gemara about what happened. And I think it would be accurate to say that there are a variety of dynamics that kind of coincided. So what you're describing is another Medrash that says Moshe sees the letters are leaving the tablets. And so number one, he understands that the sanctity is diminished. Elsewhere, it explains that Moshe didn't throw them down. He dropped the tablets because they were being carried by the holiness and the energy of the tablets. And now that energy is gone, it was too heavy for him to hold. I imagine someone might want to say that Moshe had an adrenaline rush, if you could say such a thing. And so it gave him the great strength to be able to carry it. He was so excited and eager to present the tablets. And maybe when he saw the golden calf, he was drained of all of his energy. And so there's many different variations of how to understand it. But ultimately, Moshe does so with some degree of intent and willingness, and that's what we're talking about over here. Beryl?
Rabbi, to the extent of which, and maybe that explains that phrase in the last pasuk of what it took from Moshe when Moshe said, "Take my name out of the book."
That's part of the same. It's part of the same idea that Moshe is willing to forego all of his personal covet as long as the Jewish people are okay. And it's a absolutely.
That was his chesed.
Yeah. Let's see. All right. So now we've finished a little detour. The detour of the 3 decisions that Moshe made unilaterally, including, according to Rabbi Yossi, adding a day to the Torah giving timeline. The Gemara is now going to challenge. The Gemara is now going to challenge Rabbi Yossi.
Rabbi,
I'm sorry?
Didn't he do 2 other things on his own? When they left Egypt, he decided to let a lot of the Egyptians come along.
There are other ideas that are brought out there. This particular brisa only mentions these 3 items. I'll tell you why. There were other items that maybe Moshe did unilaterally that did not get a divine sign-off. There are other times that Hashem said, you could do this on your own, but I'm not getting behind it.
That was with the spies.
So possibly so the things that you're referencing the Erev Rav, which Hashem says, these are your people. I never said to take them out. And you're also mentioning the spies that were sent, where Hashem says, Shlach lechami datcha. Hashem says, I'll defer to your judgment. So it's not quite the same arrangement as over here, where Moshe makes a unilateral decision and Hashem gives the divine endorsement.
But Hashem told the Jewish people that he would protect them and he would lead them into war, and they shouldn't worry. And they're going to have a land of honey and milk
Right.
and honey. So he said, I'm going to protect you. So they should have known then not to send spies.
Indeed.
But Moshe went and said, okay.
That's a discussion for another time, Be'ezer Hashem. But good.
Yeah.
But Rabbi Allen, your scholarship is admirable. Eshkayach for bringing that, so we have the fullness of the picture. We're able to point out that there are times that it wasn't exactly a glowing endorsement, or Hashem tells Moshe, I'll defer to you, but not going to sign off on it. Shkoyach Rabbi Allen. Tashema, now we're going to challenge Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says 7 days pass from the arrival to Mount Sinai on Sunday till the receiving of the Torah on Shabbos, the 7th day of Sivan. Tashema, we're going to bring a source that seems to challenge Rabbi Yossi's assertion. V'hayu nechonim l'yom hashlishi. Moshe, Hashem tells Moshe, go down Lech el ha'am, go to the people. Kidashtam hayom u'machar, sanctify today and tomorrow. Yechibsu simloisam, and clean your clothing. V'hayu nechonim l'yom hashlishi. Be prepared for the 3rd day, ki b'yom hashlishi, because on the 3rd day, Yered Hashem le'nikol ha'am al har Sinai. On the 3rd day from now, Hashem will descend on the mountain. This is the pasuk. Let's see how this brisa interprets it. V'hayu nechonim l'shloisha l'yom hashlishi. Kasha l'Rabbi Yossi. This challenges Rabbi Yossi's assertion. Ha'amrina yom echad hoysem Moshe midatai. I'm sorry. Kasha l'Rabbi Yossi. This challenges Rabbi Yossi, because the 3 days would end on the 6th of Sivan. And Rabbi Yossi says that it ends on the 7th of Sivan. If you want to see Rabbi Steinsaltz, his explanation. This indicates that Hashem said that the Torah would be given on the 3rd day after 2 days of separation. And ultimately, there was 3 days of separation, and it's 4 days later. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi will answer, no problem. Hashem initially says, be ready for in 3 days, which will be 3 days after 3 days plus 3, which would be 6. Moshe added a day, so it ends up being 4 days. What were the 4 days? Just to refresh our memory from yesterday. The Daled Sivan, the 4th of Sivan. Tuesday, the 3rd of Sivan, they would stay away from the mountain. And then Dalet, Hey, and Vav, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they would be separate. The couples, the spouses would be separate. And then on Shabbos, the 7th day, they would go to mikveh and then receive the Torah. So Rabbi Yossi says, what are you asking me? This is exactly my point. Initially, it was supposed to be on the 6th day, and Moshe added a day. So Rabbi Yossi is not particularly perturbed by this pasuk. Rashi. I'm sorry, I said a brisa. Take that back. The question was the pasuk. Rabbi Yossi explains the pasuk. Let's read Rashi. On the verse that Hashem tells Moshe, be ready for the 3rd day, which would end up being on the 6th of Sivan. These were the words of Moshe. But when Moshe went back to the Jewish people, what he said was, he didn't say in 3 days. He said, be ready for 3 full days. Pirshu Gimel Yamim. He kept them separate, husband and wife, for 3 days instead of 2 days. Now you'll ask, Rashi says, I know, you're going to go back to Chumash. And there's another verse that says on the 3rd day. What's the 3rd day? Shlishi liyamim shleimim. This is 3 complete 24-hour periods. Shalevan iman kamar, days and nights, which was exactly Moshe's equation. So again, long story short, Rabbi Yossi says there were 3 days of separation in addition to 1 day of Hagbala, 1 day of additional day of being apart from the mountain. And the Gemara answers, this is very consistent with Rabbi Yossi's interpretation that Moshe added another day. Tashema, another challenge. Shlishi. It says Shlishi on the 3rd day. What does that mean? Shlishi b'chodesh u'shlishi b'Shabbos. The 3rd day of the month, which was Tuesday. Who says that the days of the week coincide with the days of the month? Yom Rishon, Sunday, was Aleph Sivan, 1 Sivan. Monday, Yom Sheni, was Beis Sivan. This is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Kasha l'Rabbanan, and therefore, Rabbanan have a problem with this. Amilach Rabbanan, you know what the Rabbanan will respond? You're quoting me a brisa that challenges me. You're just quoting my opponent. Ha-mani Rabbi Yossi. This is precisely the words of Rabbi Yossi. So it'd be like saying, you and I have a disagreement, and you'll search online, and you'll find an article taking my position, and you'll bring it to me and say, you see what and I'll bring it to you and say, you see what I found on the internet? It proves me right and proves you wrong. And you'll take the article and yeah, but who's the author of that article? It's you. So you can't quote yourself in support of yourself, right? And so that's what Rabbanan are essentially saying. You can't try to disprove me by bringing an article written by my intellectual opponent here. Tashema, Rashi, the Tanya bebraisa hachi shlishi b'chodesh, haya shlishi b'Shabbos layel. Come on, boy, shlishi come lamai. Anyways, that's explaining more. Kash l'Rabbanan, the shamina b'chad b'Shabbos ikva yarcha. Anyways, long story short, Rashi explaining here how this brisa could be a challenge to the Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan say that doesn't bother me. The author of that article. It's like today, there's a website called Wikipedia. Maybe you're familiar with it. And Wikipedia is a great, repository of information on every subject under the sun. But the problem is, who edits Wikipedia? The masses, people. And so if you have an agenda, you could try to edit Wikipedia to reflect your agenda. And then this happens in real life. People will be in a fight with someone, and so they'll edit Wikipedia to reflect their bad impression on the other individual. And then they'll turn to Wikipedia as proof that the person is, or they'll prove their point by an article they themselves edited. And so unfortunately, this is a mashal, what I'm saying. So here you have a crowd-sourced document, but it's not scientific and it's not, rigorously edited to be sure of objective truth. Rebel?
In philosophy, they call that a tautology. You start with a conclusion and find reasons to back it up.
Perhaps, but here it's even worse. It's not just that you start with a conclusion, but you use yourself as evidence that you're right. Right? If you have a strongly held opinion, you write an article on Google, from now on, when someone searches the issue, they'll find your article on Google. So if you have an argument with someone, you say, go on the internet, Google search. There's an article, but you wrote it. All right. Shlishi Lamai. Now that we've mentioned that the verse says Vayihi Bayom HaShlishi, the third day of what? We have a problem. In Hebrew, the days of the week are called Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi. The days of the month are called Rishon, Sheni, and Shlishi. And you could also randomly have a conversation about something that happened in 3 days. And so what does it mean in the third day? Shlishi Lamai, the third day of what? The Brisa explains, Yoshev Moshe is Divrei Ha'amal Hashem. Moshe goes down to tell the Jewish people, be sanctified, etc., etc. And then Moshe goes back to Hashem to repeat the words the Jewish people said. And then Moshe communicated with Hashem. And so 3 days from that, Rashi L'Chedetanya, Yom Shlishi L'Dvarim Shehischel Moshe L'Hamshech Liban Shel Yisrael L'Far Shel Yinasam Umatan Schar V'Oisa Yom Haya Shlishi B'Chayda Shlishi V'Shabbos Rabbi Yossi Kamala. The third day of the week, which is the third day of the month, which is the third day since the Jewish people have entered into a dialogue. Rashi V'Yashav V'Yaged V'Chima Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, this is Rashi on the next one. Ma Amar Le Kadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe. What did Hashem tell Moshe? Umar Moshe Yisrael. And what did Moshe tell the Jews? Umar Amar Yisrael LeMoshe. And what did the Jewish people repeat back to Moshe? Umar Heishiv Moshe L'Fnei Agvura. And what exactly was the response that Moshe responded back to Hashem? Zu mitzvah sagbala. So we are referencing the commandment to be distant from the mountain. This is what Rabbi Yossi says. Rabbi Yossi says, on the third day of the week, on Tuesday, Hashem instructed the Jewish people to stay away from the mountain. This might sound confusing because a lot of words, but essentially we're recapping more or less the same idea. That on Tuesday, they were told to stay off the mountain. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, stay away from your spouse. Shabbos, Matan Torah. So Rabbi Yossi says that. Rabbi says no. First, Moshe explains to them the punishments, the consequences of Torah. Vayoshev Moshe. Literally, Moshe returned, but it also means that Moshe told the Jewish people, Dvarim Shemishavavin Daton Shel Adam. He told them the things that would technically shatter. That's what Rav Haigoin translates. He told them things that would potentially put them off a little bit. Shemoinim Kabul, things that might keep a person from accepting the word. Shim Yakablu Ya'anshu Advar Malalu Meshavan Eslibam and Amakim V'Apol Pikin Kibalim. So Moshe initially told them words that would technically or potentially turn them off. Interesting. We know that if a person wants to convert to Judaism, what do they typically do? Initially, there is a strong attempt to discourage the individual from converting. There are a number of good reasons why that is done, but perhaps this interpretation would say that in a sense, we're treating a person that is prospectively joining the Jewish people the same way that the Jewish people experienced the first time when all Jews were going to become Gerim, to convert to Judaism. The Ikadamri, others interpret this a little differently. First, Moshe told them the rewards. Moshe returned. Things that will cause the person to be into what's being discussed. In the end, Moshe also shared the punishments. So we have a variety of variations in interpreting what precisely the conversations between Moshe and the Jewish people. We know Moshe told them some of the perks, some of the responsibilities. Exactly how it unfolded, we have varying interpretations. So Rebbe is the one who says that Moshe first told them things that would be unpopular. So I wanted to show you fast what Ben Yehuda explains. Why did Moshe start off with the negative and the positive? Why did he start off with the unpopular and then the popular? So he says something very interesting. You know why? Because the world, I'm just going to paraphrase, the world depends on the Torah to survive. The verse says in Yirmiyahu, Im lebrisi yom v'layla, if not for the Torah, the covenant of day and night, chukei shamayim va'aretz lo samti. Hashem says, I would never create the world with all of its nature and all of its existence. So Moshe treats the Jewish people like the world itself. First, he introduces the dark side, the strict side, the unenlightened side, punishment. Then he shared the matters of light, the things that are pleasant, desirous, and that would sell it. And the other opinion who says that Moshe started off with the fun, the incentive, and then the negatives. Well, maybe he was reflecting Adam Harishain's experience. Human being was created in the daytime. So first they experienced light, and only afterwards they experienced dark. That's a cute idea. Alternatively, we've seen this teaching before a while back. Let's take a look real fast. The Maharsha writes that in the word mitzvah, mem tzadik vav he, you have yud ke vav ke. You know why? Mem tzadik, in the famous code of Atbash, you know, there's a code where you exchange, as if in English it would be, you exchange A and Z, right? So Aleph and Taf are exchanged, Beis and Shin exchange, At, Bash, Aleph turns into Taf, Beis turns into Shin. If you take the letters Mem and Tzadik, with this code, it becomes Yud K. So sure. Mitzvah, Yud K Vav K. So why is it that Yud K is concealed with Mem Tzadik? Because the Zohar says, Gevura, the strict part of Torah comes from Yud K. The lenient part, the Chesed, comes from Vav K. So the part of the mitzvah that's Gevura is concealed. The part of Vav K, which is revelation, positivity, is revealed. All right, whatever. There's a lot more here. But anyways, the point here is that Moshe conveys to the Jewish people this, the duality of Torah. There's a reward, there's punishment, there's an upside, but there's a liability. And Rebbe says he starts, well, and there's discussion in which one was presented first. My dear friends, we're not done with the story of Matan Torah. We're going to spend another few days, but I feel compelled to go back to the passage of the Gemara, which I skipped. And when we go to this Gemara, it was yesterday. It's also going to fill in a conversation that we had. And we were discussing, and pardon me if this makes anyone feel uncomfortable, we were discussing that in Jewish law, semen, zera, conveys ritual impurity. Not a extreme degree of ritual impurity, but a degree of ritual impurity that would warrant toiveling in a mikveh before partaking of matters that are associated to the temple and other sanctified stuff. That was our discussion that we did a few days back. And I skipped yesterday. I was at home and I skipped one passage, which I believe is going to be informative for a previous discussion. So I'm just getting to find the place. Bear with me. All right. We asked the question. Again, if this makes anyone feel uncomfortable, you're welcome. We're at the end. You're welcome to go off. We asked the question. We said that we spoke about the viability of sperm, and Rashi says that the reason why this semen, the zera, remains able to convey ritual impurity is as long as it is potent and effective. And so someone asked the question, what about if it's frozen or if it's in a sperm bank, does it lose its ability? The sperm is potent, so does it remain capable of ritual impurity or not? That was the question I was asked. I made a guess. I said that I imagine that it probably would follow the rules of 3 days, because that's where we get into the second part of our discussion, which is that if a couple was intimate and there was a discharge of this same semen or the zera. So after 3 days or 2 days, depending on the opinion, it would lose its potency and it would also no longer convey ritual impurity. So I said probably if it's in a sperm bank or if it's frozen, the same thing would apply. And then I said that we have to look because there's probably teshuvah. Ultimately, I was incorrect, I believe, because the Gemara here almost directly addresses this. So let's go through this. We're going to go here. Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, Machloikes, the debate about if it continues to convey ritual impurity after 2 days or 3 days is only Shapir Sham in Ha'isha if it was a discharge from a woman. Aval Pirsham in Ha'ish. But if it was just discharged from the male and was not received by a female, Teya Tumeya Kozman Sheilacha, it remains able to convey ritual impurity as long as it is moist, which would essentially mean that if it was preserved by a bank or for fertility treatment or whatever, most likely it would maintain this degree of ritual impurity. As discussed many times, there's not much practical application in 2021 because this kind of ritual impurity isn't disruptive or impactful with day-to-day Jewish life. But as a hypothetical, that was the question. Isn't there a verse that says that the shechva zera, the semen, is no longer impure if it is spoiled? My lab shapir sham in ha'ish. Isn't this talking about that it came from the male? No, shapir sham in ha'isha. So this is a Gemara that I skipped yesterday, and ultimately it gives an important answer to this hypothetical, although not really halachically actionable issue of if contained in a bank, if it conveys ritual impurity. My dear friends, I think, let's see if we can do one more paragraph over here of the Gemara about Matan Torah, and then we'll call it a day. Yes.
Since we're talking about that, I was reading that if the Kohen in the Beis Hamikdash has a discharge while he's on duty, that he could stay there until he's finished and then wash himself.
So when we get to the Gemara Talmud, we'll discuss that. It's not so simple. Basically, the doors were closed in the evening, and so they would stay there until the doors opened in the daytime, and then they would go out and toivel in the mikvah. But, anyways, as far as 2021, this does not have a lot of actionable relevance, except as we discussed, there are Jews who go to the mikvah, to Konas Ezra, they go to mikvah before studying Torah, before prayer, and so I guess this would have some degree of relevance for that. All right, let's do one more little paragraph. As you recall, again, there are two opinions. When Matan Torah happened, was it on the 6th of Sivan or the 7th of Sivan? And Rabbi Yossi says it happened on the 7th of Sivan. The Rabbanan say it happened on the 6th of Sivan. And we've been challenging both opinions with different sources from the Torah, different Braitot, etc. Tashema. Let's try to find some proof. Shishi, it says Shishi. Shishi b'chodesh, Shishi b'Shabbos. The 6th means Friday and the 6th of the month. Kash the Rabbanan, and this too would challenge the Rabbanan who said that the Torah was given on Shishi on the 6th day of the month, which was on Shabbos. The Gemara's answer is Hanami Rabbi Yossi. Same answer. You're quoting the article that you yourself wrote. This Brisa is Rabbi Yossi's opinion. So that's not going to be a challenge to the Rabbanan. Of course, Rabbi Yossi is of the opinion that Shabbos, Friday, the 6th of the week, was also Shishi, the 6th of the month. Shishi the Mai. The Gemara asks, what does it mean, the 6th of the day? 6th to what? Rava Amar Lechani Yasan. 6 days since they arrived and camped around Mount Sinai. Rashi says, Shabbos Ch9 Chanu. As we know, on Rosh Chodesh, that's when the Jews encamped around the mountain. V'achik Amar Shishi Lechani Yasan. Hu Shishi b'Chodesh. Hu Shishi b'Shabbos. Rav Acha disagrees and says Lema'ason. This is the 6th day from when they departed from their previous encampment from Refidim. And this plugs into our previous and ongoing machlokes about exactly the date, the time frame. With Hashem's help, we just turned the page to 87b, and tomorrow we'll pick up from the top of 87b and continue our journey through the Talmud. I want to thank you all for being here on this busy Monday morning. And may Hashem bless all of Klal Yisrael with good news and health and happiness. And Rabbi Shalom Ber, as soon as we end this link, you'll start Chumash. We'll end this link in just a moment, and you're welcome to rejoin for the study of Chumash. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
Yes,
you. Bye, everybody. Bye.